FATCA. Yes, it is coming. We need to be FATCA compliant. Trinidad and Tobago, and well, if you want to say it has arrived in Trinidad and Tobago, it's been here, but it took us a little while to become compliant, and we need to be now. But are you prepared for it? The legislation actually requires Trinidad and Tobago financial institutions to provide reports to the U.S., as you well know, the IRS, for accounts held by U.S. citizens via the Trinidad and Tobago Board of Inland Revenue, and that means U.S. citizens as well as holders of green cards. So anyone who is a U.S. citizen residing in Trinidad and Tobago or is a holder of a green card has to file with respect to whatever monies they have over 50,000, is it?
Individuals, it's
50,000 US dollars.
in the aggregate.
There you go. But to let us know where we are exactly with respect to FATCA and Trinidad and Tobago becoming FATCA compliant, I'd like to welcome Michele Martin, who is the president of Compliance Aid. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
Glad to have you with. And also Stanley Foodman, who is the CEO of Compliance Aid. Good morning to you.
Well, for Foodman CPAs.
For food, right. So good morning to you and glad to have you with as we're talking this whole FATCA issue that so many people were so nervous about, so many people were scared about, especially people holding accounts and now having to declare it to the IRS. So are the financial institutions in Trinidad and Tobago facing any negative consequences with respect to the IGA 1 is in substance and not yet implemented? Anything going on with that yet?
As of the end of 2016, Trinidad and Tobago was put in a position because it hadn't signed its IGA 1 and implemented it to be put on a list to be reviewed. And what that meant was that if the United States government decided that the government of Trinidad wasn't serious enough or wasn't implementing it, they can be removed from the IGA list, and all of the institutions in Trinidad would then have to re-register with FATCA and begin the process of implementation on their own with no help from the government.
Can you explain to us what the IGA 1 is exactly?
The IGA, there are two IGA 1s. One is reciprocal reporting, one is non-reciprocal reporting. I believe that Trinidad's is an IGA 1A, which is reciprocal reporting, which means that the government of Trinidad will receive certain information from the United States regarding accounts that Trinidadians, whether they're dual citizens or not, hold within the U.S.
Okay. How are dual Trinidad and Tobago U.S. citizens affected by FATCA reporting?
So U.S. citizens are required to report their reportable income on a worldwide basis, which means that, and their accounts. Now, while the institutions, the financial institutions, have to report accounts which aggregate more than $50,000 at any time during a year, or at the end of the year, I should say, U.S. citizens or U.S. taxpayers have a different trigger point. They have to report based on a $10,000 aggregate balance at any time during the year. So those that haven't been reporting, they're going to get reported, certain number of them. If they're not, and so they have certain amnesty programs that are available to them in the United States. If not, then they're subject to the full extent of the penalty regimes inside the United States, which are actually quite draconian financially.
Yeah, they are. Explain to me, though, a Trinidadian or Trinidad and Tobago citizen now living in the U.S. and now a citizen of the U.S. For a while, been filing their taxes with the IRS, as you have to do when you're in the U.S. You don't get away from that in the U.S. at all. Now, as we're FATCA compliant, has an account in Trinidad and Tobago. How does that work? How does the U.S. citizen living in the U.S., Trinidad and Tobago U.S. citizen living in the U.S., do that if they own an account or have an account in Trinidad and Tobago? How does that work?
So if they had a reportable, what's called a reportable account in Trinidad and Tobago, and they didn't report it and they are reported, they will be facing certain penalties in other situations. So in order to prevent that and help the folks that are caught into that situation who didn't actually realize that they had worldwide reporting not only on their income, but on their accounts and their financial assets, the IRS created a series of amnesties. There are 3 basic programs, and depending on what they qualify for, they could go ahead and enter into one of those programs.
But is it on the U.S. end or on the Trinidad and Tobago end? Because the onus would have to be on the U.S. citizen. But if it is that they don't, how do the institutions here, and especially so the Inland Revenue Board, know that that person is a U.S. citizen? And yeah.
Well, each financial institution that falls under FATCA, whether it's a bank or a credit union, insurance, they have certain reporting obligations. So as we opened by talking about the threshold of the 50,000 for individuals, 250 for the entities, they're required to go through their customer base and identify the status of each of their customers, who has dual citizenship, and those that have dual citizenship and meet the thresholds, their responsible officer needs to report that over to the Inland Revenue, which will then get reported up to the U.S.
Okay. My concern about that is that many times if people do have dual citizenship, they don't report to any of these institutions that they do in fact have dual citizenships. And then what happens in the instance where there might be joint accounts with the U.S. citizen and Trinbagonian? What happens then?
So from the U.S. side, the U.S. takes the position that if a Trinidadian citizen who's in the U.S. and has an account and is earning more than $10 of interest and or dividends on that account during the year, they will report that interest under the IGA-1A to the government of Trinidad. Now, they're not reporting balances, they're only reporting interest, but it's a simple calculation to divide and find out what the balances are, and then of course the Inland Revenue here could do its job in determining whether or not they want to go further with those accounts.
Okay. Now, what is the possible effect of the de-risking on the effectiveness of the FATCA agreement between the U.S. and Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, this is where anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism actually ties in with the FATCA. A lot of the information that FATCA is asking for is actually already being captured under the anti-money laundering, under the KYC, Know Your Customer process. And so the financial institutions, a number of them throughout the region, not just in Trinidad, are actually been trying to take their anti-money laundering program, their policies and procedures, to enhance it for the FATCA. Now, when it comes to correspondent banking and de-risking, the correspondent bankers, the financial institutions in the US and around the world that offer that type of relationship, they're basically saying if a financial institution is not compliant with FATCA or AML-CFT, that they're probably going to lose that relationship, hence the whole de-risking conversation. Not just on the banking side, but also on the insurance side, because the reinsurers are also saying if the insurance company is not compliant with FATCA and AML, that they may choose not to, enter into any more relationships with them and then cease the relationship. And thus, of course, then it will have repercussions on the economy.
Yeah, which is already not all that great. And it's September, that's the deadline for FATCA.
Right, it's an annual for an IGA-1 country, it's September.
Right.
Now, in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, because it's been in substance rather than implemented and signed, it will have to go back to July 1st, I believe, of 2014 and start to report from July 1st of 2014 forward.
Okay.
None of the reports are being excused at this point.
Oh, that's a lot of work.
Well, yes, but there's a blessing in all of this, and that is that it's mostly IT generated, and these are reports that should hopefully be able to come out of the computers after the due diligence is done.
Have you found that financial institutions have been cooperative with respect to this, becoming FATCA compliant?
I'd say yes, and throughout the region. I think part of the problem was that a lot of them were actually waiting on the respective governments in Trinidad and other countries throughout the region, that they're waiting on their local governments to see what their governments were going to do, where they would have gone ahead and signed up with the IRS to get their GIN, their reporting number, but a lot of them had not gone much further than that. Now you're seeing a lot more emphasis because of the de-risking issue that has been happening, that they've started to put in place, their FATCA program and identify a responsible officer to manage the FATCA compliance in their entities and their procedures and their trainings and all of that stuff now going into place because of the de-risking. It's kind of speeded up or expedited, you can say, the whole FATCA process now.
Okay, so things are on stream basically then.
Yes, with respect to the de-risking, because a lot of the large money center banks have left the region in terms of correspondent banking, there's another level of institutions that have come into the region, slowly coming through, that are willing to take on the correspondent accounts again, providing that they can be assured of that their cost of monitoring those particular correspondent accounts will not exceed their profits.
All right. All right, thank you all so much. FATCA compliant is where Trinidad and Tobago needs to be come September. We're on the road to that, so that's a positive sign. And remember, dual citizenships, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, not just financial institutions that need to be FATCA compliant, but also remember citizens, U.S. citizens who were Trinidad and Tobago citizens at one point, and of course green card holders. You also need to look at your monies. So thank you so much, Michele Martin, and also Stanley Foodman, for coming and letting us know where we're at with respect to FATCA. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Pleasure.